Hi, Sister Paulette. Good morning.
Good morning, Amy. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Uh, can
Yes.
you hear me?
You can
All
see
right,
you and hear you just fine.
great. You tell me when to start.
Um, well, I think originally Emiliano was supposed to introduce you, but I can do that because I don't see
Go
it on
for it.
video, so I'll do it.
All right, good.
Okie dokie. I'm glad you were able to get on without any difficulty. I was a little concerned just because,
Me
had
too.
issues. But glad to see it. Okay, so everyone, thank you so much for coming and joining us for this session. We added Sister Paulette to the schedule at the last minute because we knew it was so important for us to include this subject. Paulette Schroeder is a sister of St. Francis now for 61 years. She is one of 13 children raised on a small farm in Putnam County, Ohio. Paulette officially began peace work as a witness for peace to Nicaragua on a delegation trip during the Sandinista Revolution in 1977. In 2005, she made a delegation to the Middle East with the Christian peacemaker teams from Chicago. Later, Sister Schrader joined the team in Hebron, Palestine for 3 years. Their job description was to come between, deter, prevent violence at the checkpoints, etc. She says that the ministry turned her inside out, such that she couldn't go back to any normal sort of living. Today, in an effort to continue lifting the voices of the Palestinians and to deal with the violence in our culture, she coordinates efforts in Project Peace, imagining a world without war. By teaching children nonviolence skills, by coordinating parades and projects for peace, and delegation trips to the Middle East, by writing articles on nonviolence and peacemaking, she continues the ministry of the Sisters of St. Francis in peacekeeping. So thank you, Sister Paulette, for joining us for this session on Israel and Palestine. How do we get here and where do we go?
Thanks, Amy. I think I'm the lucky one to be able to share this. It kind of chokes me up right now. But everyone, I feel very humbled to do this because I saw names on the screen, on the chat box that I know are so much more geared to all of this peacemaking than I am, and I'm very, very humbled. So I started, as Amy said, in 2008. I went to Hebron, Khalil in Arabic, in the old city Hebron, and at one point that had been the richest, the most valuable center of rich Arabic culture, possibly the richest area of the West Bank. At the time I went, it had been overtaken by the Israeli occupation and was now possibly one of the poorest areas economically, with devastation in buildings, with destruction of great historic ancient buildings, with even the Ibrahimi Mosque divided, and inside a bulletproof window from the synagogue side and a bulletproof window from the Muslim side, looking at the graves of Sarah and Abraham, their great matriarch and patriarch, respectively. All this time, we Christian peacemakers, where I had been trained in Chicago, were welcomed as a guest by the Palestinian Muslim community. And our job, as Amy shared with you, was really to get in the way of violence. And whoever was doing the violence, stop it, get in the way. Right at this point, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I have learned that people think it's anti-Semitic, some people do, to even criticize anything that's going on in the West Bank in Palestine, committed by the Israeli occupation. And I say, no way. It's anti-Semitic when you're criticizing the religion. I never would do that. Our Christian religion, after all, is founded on the Jewish religion. But I am criticizing the Israeli policies, the government, as I do the United States government policies, oftentimes in the work I do. Okay, so I was quickly educated about the occupation, which is the root of the problems causing the apartheid situation in Palestine. And I call it apartheid because I'm taking after Mandela, the great peacemaker of South Africa, and after Jimmy Carter, our president, who wrote the book on the Palestinian occupation, the occupation of Palestine. And in this apartheid system, humanitarian rights were being denied over and over and over. There were separate roads. There were different laws, civil military laws applied to Palestinians and Israelis, different travel rights, different work rights, different laws applying to getting to their own land to work it. Basic services like water were stolen by the control of the Israeli government. You know, I got so sick of the word security. Why did you do that, young man, talking to an Israeli soldier, for example? Why did you do that? Why did you push that youth, that Palestinian youth coming through the checkpoint against the wall and detain them for 3 hours? Why? There was no reason for it. Security, ma'am, security. Oftentimes I found the word, the concept was a ploy just to, because they could. The military seemed to think it had the right to invade the houses without any warning, to go on the rooftop and settle there. They were flat roofs, of course. They had the right to invade a home and overturn furniture and rip off the pictures and the backing of the precious pictures because, oh, maybe there was a weapon in there, to take any of the teen boys as suspects and then take them off to the prison without telling the parents where and how long, et cetera, et cetera. Checkpoints, flying checkpoints, new settlements on Palestinian land, burning of a whole groves of olive trees, terrible crimes against the Palestinians. You know, I went to a little village outside of Hebron at one point, and I sat and watched an old man sitting on a big rock in front of the checkpoint. I asked him why he was sitting there. He said, because I've sat here for 3 days. I come early in the morning. I need to get over to my land because my fruit is rotting. I need to get through that checkpoint, and they won't let me through. He had been told by the soldiers, just go to this neighboring town and see, go to the authorities there and ask them to verify your identity. But I can't. It's a Jewish holiday. They're closed for 10 days. Things like that, really raised the temperature inside of me. And I saw the terrible inconsistency, as Maria shared so beautifully, about the humanitarian rights for all. I'll tell you a couple other stories. One day I was walking down Shahada Street, which bordered our Christian Peacemaker team apartment. Now, Palestinians weren't allowed to go down that street because it was all barred up. All the stores had been barred up. This was one of the most thriving streets in Old City Hebron at one point. I went down that street, and I and another peacemaker were stopped by 3 teenage young Jewish men. And they were with the mother of one of them. They were so going CPT, 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 like mocking us for our efforts as Christian peacemakers. The mother did not stop them. Then the boys grabbed Jessica, much younger than myself, and tried to grab the camera, which had a strap around her neck, off of her and tear it away from her. For me, one of them took my coat, tried to grab it off. It was January. It was very cold. And of course, we were screaming to the soldiers who were about 50 feet behind us in a checkpoint. the soldiers seemed not to bother with us. Finally, screaming very loudly, they came, they got the kids off of us and the mother back from us, and we made a police report. Of course, we waited several hours for the police to come. And then the police merely listed it, and that was going to be all. We knew that, but we needed to list it. It happened that Jessica, when we got back to the apartment, didn't even remember the particulars of the assault. I went to bed. I lay motionless for 15 hours. I couldn't believe it. I was so traumatized by the crudeness and cruelty of these settler kids. Another time I was sent out, and it was to 4 teenage Palestinian boys who were lined up against a wall, and they had their hands up against the wall. It was cold. I said finally to the soldiers who were monitoring them, I said, let them at least put their hands inside of their coat sleeves or their jacket sleeves, or let us go and get some warmer clothing for them. But it did not happen. The mothers were standing by, just crying. They had been informed by some friends of these kids. And they were there and said, oh, my son just went to get milk. Oh, my son just went to visit his grandmother. Oh, my son was just running a little errand to one of the neighbor boys. They were randomly picked up and accused of throwing stones at the soldiers. The other audience at this scene were settler kids. And these settlers whom we had gotten to know, this was from Beit Hadassah on Shahada Street. But the settlers whom we got to know around Hebron were fanatical right-wing settlers. About 20% of the Israeli population is represented in this fanatical group. Now, I think there are over 700,000 Jewish settlers, Israeli settlers, I should say, in these settlements in the West Bank itself. I was turned inside out by all of these kinds of events. When I went to Tunica, another little village outside of Hebron, and stayed for 3 months, and in total I was here for 3 years in this area, with a month break between every 3 months, in order to do advocacy better back in the United States. So when I went to Tunica, here was a little pristine, primitive village of very, very simple people living very simply. They had no electricity. They had no water. We had to go out to the well each day and pull up the buckets of water. It was, we slept in a little, it was a little cement house. But when there were 5 of us, we were sleeping in all corners of the house. So it was primitive, but we got very involved with the people of the village. And it was wonderful becoming friends with them. And oftentimes we slept on the rooftop of our little house because it was so hot inside. There, of course, was no air. So when we were on the rooftop, each morning there were the braying of the donkeys, and the camels were making their noise, ready to get up. The sheep were making their noises. They're bah. But the settlers around that little village of Tunica were so cruel again, and would we would go to the mountainside of this little village, to the hillsides, and watch for the settlers to come so that the shepherds could tend their goats peacefully. And when the settlers would come, they would throw rocks. They would make the sheep run and the shepherd run in order to, as we learned, help the sheep lose their poundage so that the settlers, the Palestinians, would get less for their money, for their sheep when they sold them. One time they spread poison all over the pasture lands, and the Palestinians couldn't sell their sheep. One time they put poison, or a dead chicken, I guess, into the well so that the Palestinians could not drink from that well. It had to be purified of all that poison that the chicken caused, the dead chicken caused. After 2005, differences came about. Gaza elected, or the Palestinians had an election. So Hamas was elected as the chief political party. Fatah, the other political party, had become very corrupt under Nasser Arafat. Hamas had delivered social services to the Palestinians when they were in need. Hamas had built the hospitals, they were governing in Gaza at this point. And so when they were elected, it was through a democratic process. They had monitors there saying that, no, this election was fair. It was democratic. Now, Israel and the United States did not like seeing that Hamas was elected. They knew that Hamas had a militant arm. Certainly it did. This arm was going to defend itself. This arm was the social services. Fatah did neither of those things for the people. In 2008, there was a war, a 22-day war in Gaza. After the war, there were 1,400 people killed in Gaza, they found. The people saw that they had killed many of their children. The Goldstone report was put forth. An Israeli, very famous man, investigated the whole 2008 war and found that, it was a war in which there were many things to be condemned. It was not a just war, if they're looking for justice. In wartime, it was against international approved rules that everyone was supposed to go by. Goldstone and his people wrote up a book of 575 pages that it seemed that there had been collective punishment put down upon the Palestinians in Gaza. However, later, Goldstone such pressure was put on him that he retracted this report. Then there were wars in 2012, 2014, not responses to Palestinian rockets, to Hamas rockets. And at this time, the Qassam rockets were pretty much homemade. They surely developed until the terrible rockets into Israel and invasion of Israel through the tunnels and killing 1,200 Israelis, including children and women. Horrible, horrible, terrible crimes committed by Hamas. But in 2014, they were not these kinds of rockets yet that did such harm. The tunnels did not enable them at that time to go into Israeli territory. In 2012, Sharon, who was the prime minister of Israel at the time, his son Gilad described in the Jerusalem Post, which I followed quite closely, and the Haaretz of Israel, what Israel should do before any ceasefire should be considered. There should be no electricity in Gaza, no gasoline or moving vehicles, nothing. Then they'd really call for a ceasefire. Now, today we know in this war, there is no consideration of ceasefire by Israel. They are giving humanitarian pauses, thank you, God, for this, of 4 hours a day. But no ceasefire, they say, until Hamas is totally destroyed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that my neighbors in Hebron were Hamas. They were not violent. Palestinians generally will not be violent. It does them no good. They learned this. And they developed all kinds of pockets throughout Palestine of nonviolent communities. When the wall was built around their land in 2002 starting, and pretty much encircled the whole of Palestine, when their land had been taken away little piece by little piece, and much more in the wars, when Israel had been declared a state in 1948, and it had been reduced to this. If you can see this, the first panel is as it was, and the white is Israeli communities. And this is in 1948. Palestine is the green. That was 33% of Israel, of the land that they had formerly. And then in 48, you can see that Israel did not agree to that and started taking even more land. This is Gaza down here. And this is 2013. And when I left in 2011, it was about like this. Today, is even less Palestinian land, excuse me. Now it's 22% of what they had originally. All right. So because of all of these, human rights denied them, because of their land being taken away, because of the lack of world response to their cause, and because the occupation had existed now for 75 years, I think the pressure cooker just exploded. They couldn't go on like this, especially for the people in Gaza, where there were 2.2 million Palestinians in a 26-mile length of land and 5 miles wide. 2.2 million Palestinians. And probably the Hamas did build tunnels under the hospitals because they knew it was against international law to bomb hospitals. I think I do not excuse Hamas for any of the violence. I think, though, in their case, they just couldn't see their going on like this. And so they put themselves and their people in harm's way, hoping, like one of my Palestinian friends said from Bethlehem, that it would end in a couple days. As we see, it has not, and it will not end soon, because Israel is intent upon destroying Hamas completely. I think, too, that Hamas, when they were elected democratically in 2006, that they thought because they were elected democratically, that they would be respected throughout the world. And they knew in their heart that we in America, we have militancy. We believe in militarism. Our government does. And so we're respected generally throughout the world, they thought. And so they thought they too would be respected, but they weren't. And so now we deal with all of this terrible, terrible harm that is being done to people in Gaza, being pushed down to the middle of Gaza and slowly being pushed farther south, hoping that Egypt will accept the Palestinians down into Sinai. I recall about 10 years ago, Jeff Helper, a Israeli citizen who was living in the United States at the time, came to our place here in Tiffin, Ohio, and told us that he could foresee. And Jeff had been in charge of ICAD, which was Israelis Against the Demolition, house demolitions. And his organization would help Palestinians rebuild their homes in the secret of night, darkness. But anyway, he told us that he could see the Palestinians being driven down to the very southern edge of Gaza and into the Sinai Peninsula. And here his prophecy, if you will, his prediction is coming true. The world, what can we do about it? We must stand up for Palestinian human rights. I have this bumper sticker to that is now just campaigning. They've changed their name to Palestinian Rights, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. And I think the more we spread the message that all human beings deserve rights and that wars must stop. And biggest thing about war in Israel and Palestine is that we are so aligned to Israel that we pay so much every year, amounting to about $10 million a day that we send to this country, which has the 5th strongest military in the world, also is a first world country. And do we give something to Palestine? Yes, I think we give about $500,000 a year through the PA, which many Palestinians detest because of the collusion with Israeli politics and Israeli control. I wonder if there's anybody who has any concerns or any questions that you'd like to share. If you could put them on chat right now. Is it too late, Amy?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Not very loud.
No? Okay. Let me see. I am muffled. Oh, you know what? I had the wrong microphone.
There you are.
Sorry about that. Okay. It looks like we have at least one question in the Q&A, so I'll ask that from Kyle. It says, you mentioned that your neighbors near Hebron were Hamas. What does it mean for a Palestinian person to be Hamas? Could it be understood as a member of a political party, or is it something more?
Yes, it can be understood. You got it, Kyle. Thank you. Yes, just like we have two-party system here in the United States, they have a two-party system. And Fatah, as I said, was controlled by Yasser Arafat and had become corrupt. And Hamas was providing the social services to the Palestinians. Not that they liked this militant arm. No. They didn't elect them for that. But they elected them for their humanizing rights that they granted.
Good to know.
Asking that.
If anyone else has any questions, you're welcome to hit the blue button to request to share audio and video to come on and ask a live question, or make a live comment if that's what's interesting to you. See, we got one person here. And make sure you hit allow to allow Hopin to access your camera and microphone.
You know, there's so much I could have said that I did not say.
I'm sure.
Oh, good. Hi, Sharon.
Okay. One at a time, please, and thank you.
Hi,
Ask your
Rosalind.
questions.
A couple of things. I've been following the Israel situation very closely. With regard to the West Bank situations, I am completely opposed to Jewish settlement on the West Bank. Nevertheless, it was through the West Bank that Jordan and Lebanese armies were able to attack Israel. And I think that's part of the Israeli reason to keep them. They feel they're needed, that the area is needed as a security zone to give the Palestinians military control, would leave it open to other countries being able to come in and take over Palestine, as they did before, and move into Israel. I'm not justifying the settlements or the arrogance of those in there, but I do want to say that many people are not in the West Bank, are not these radicals who believe that God gave the West Bank to the Jews, and the Bible says that others should be expelled, as the Jewish Bible does. But Israel at one time gave a lot of economic incentives for people to move into the area.
You're right.
It's not all ideologues that are there.
Thank you, Sharon. That's exactly correct. Like the Tent of Nations is a Christian village or the settlement, and it's surrounded by 5 settlements. And once a lady from one of those settlements came up to the Tent of Nations, and Daoud Nasser said from the Tent of Nations, they didn't even know exactly what was going on. What was going on? No, they weren't. They just were Jewish folks who wanted safe place, and they got a good deal to move into the West Bank. And they didn't know their neighbors who were Palestinian. So there's just, you're correct there. I don't mean to indicate that they were all fanatical, but about 20% of the total population of settlers are.
Well, there's still 80% that wasn't, and these settlers are the most radical. A few other things with regard to U.S. aid. At this point, very little aid actually leaves the United States. It's used to pay off other loans that were given to Israel previously. And like, if you remember the recession we had in the late 1980s, that was caused by the default of Latin American banks. At this point, if we stop giving aid to Israel, we would hurt ourselves much more than we would hurt Israel, because Israel would default on billions of dollars of loans. They've really got us over a barrel here.
I thank you. I didn't know about that at all. I know that our appropriations to Israel can get higher every year.
Because we're supporting our own banks. A third thing is, I just saw today about a poll, a survey that was done in Gaza just before October 7th. Only about 20% of Palestinians now support Hamas. At one time, maybe they were considered a more honest, social service agency, government. But 17 years later, they're also seen as very corrupt. No fuel in Gaza. Well, they believe that Hamas has stockpiled 1 million liters. Hamas fighters have plenty of food and water, which they're not sharing. And Hamas, as certainly the fighting force, has lost a lot of their leaders are living in luxury in Qatar. Is now also seen, although I think Palestinians had a lot of hope for them in the beginning, at this point, they've also become very disillusioned with Hamas.
I agree. And they too would want Hamas dissolved as a political party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you both for this final discussion and question feedback and whatnot. Technically, the session is over now. We have our next session at 11:15. In the sessions tab, we will have Charles Keith with his session, Killing is Not the Answer, One Family's Witness Against the Death Penalty. So if you guys hang out here for another 5 minutes, that's not a big deal if you want to continue to chat. But I will say that there is networking happening and there's expo booths that are open. So if others want to attend those, they're welcome to. Again, thank you, Paulette. We really appreciate you joining us here today. And do you have any final recommendations about resources where people can learn more about the history of this conflict?
There's some very good novels coming out of Israel, Palestine, like the Blood Brothers, like the Lemon Tree, like Shakur. Well, the Kairos document, if you're interested in the Christian perspective. The Palestine Monitor, the Haaretz, the Jewish Haaretz is good. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Paulette. We really appreciate it.
Amy, thank you. I hope I did a decent job for the people.
Given the last minute time and energy that was necessary for it, we're grateful. If anyone wants to continue chatting in the little chat box, you're welcome to. Make sure to please join us for the next session at 11:15.
Thanks a lot, Amy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.